All right, welcome everyone. This is the final installment of our webinar series on applying to both the UK and US simultaneously. My name is Rachel Edgell and I am a college counselor at ESM Prep's London office. We are an American founded company that has been in London since 2015. And we work with students on a lot of different things, but our sort of end goal tends to be helping students apply to American universities. So anything related to that is what we sort of like to do. And because we are in London, we have a lot of students that are applying to both the UK and US. And so I am joined by my partner Harriet here, who will talk about the other side of things. So Harriet, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Of course, thank you, Rachel. So I'm Harriet Bloomfield. I am the head of consultancy at Keystone Tutors. Keystone Tutors was set up as a tutoring company with the sort of mission to professionalise tutoring. And within that, we've employed over 50 full-time tutors, and that is covering a full range of ages, right from very early years, age 6, right up through to university age. And that's where this sort of relevance of this webinar lies, really. We do a lot of university preparation and advice, specifically targeting UK universities. So all of our consultancy is designed to support students, whether they're in the UK or overseas, applying to British schools and universities. And where this relationship has really developed is in a lot of students at schools in the UK and overseas have been thinking about multiple application routes. So a number of people that we support are looking at making applications to the US and the UK, which opens up more opportunities. And once they see what's available from their application, they then can make a decision on which direction they want to go in. So it's definitely something that we are seeing more and more of. And within that, as you will see from the webinars delivered previously as well, there's a little bit more to juggle in terms of your preparation. And that's where we're really hoping this webinar series helps. So that's my introduction. Just one other thing would be there are elements that we've covered earlier in this process. So please do look back to our previous webinars or just ask us any questions and we'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, we've got the Q&A feature where you can post questions. You can post them anonymously if you'd prefer. So we're happy to answer any questions. I think we'll try to stick to the personal statement today. And then if we do have time at the end, we could branch out and answer questions on sort of elements that, as Harriet said, we might have covered earlier. If anyone does want the recordings to those webinars as well, I think both of our emails are on the last slide, so you can reach out and one of us would be happy to send you the previous recordings as well if you missed the other sort of pieces of this series. But I think we've seen similar things that, especially given the sort of uncertainty of the last year, a lot of students are trying to open all of the doors in front of them. So they are applying to different countries, which I think is great. It's really exciting. I think especially as someone who does kind of have a foot in both countries, I like seeing it. But as Harriet mentioned, there is a lot more work involved. And something I think we've both discovered throughout this series is that there are big differences between the two applications. And so we've been talking about what those differences are and how to sort of prepare for those if a student is making dual applications. And so today we're going to talk about, I think, the last sort of big piece of both applications, which is the personal statement. So we will each walk through the basics of our respective personal statements. We'll talk about the purpose of each, because I think that, again, is the main difference, is that they serve different purposes and thus need to be written in different ways. And then we'll give some specific advice on actually writing the personal statement for both the UK and the US. So again, do ask any questions at any point. We might be able to answer them sort of throughout, or we will certainly save time at the end as well. And I think we can go ahead and jump in. So I'll start with a quick introduction of the US personal statement. So I guess as sort of background, and again, we've talked about this in other webinars, the US system is a little bit different to the UK in the sense that there is no one overarching body that's responsible for applications like UCAS in the UK. There are a couple of applications like the Common App or the Coalition App, which are similar to UCAS in that you can send an application to multiple universities through this one system. But even then, there are other universities that have separate applications. I've listed a few on here, like MIT, the University of California system, or Georgetown. But regardless, students will more often than not need a personal statement. So whether they're applying on the Common App or they're applying to a university that has a separate application, there's usually a personal statement involved. For both the Common App and Coalition App, there is a 650 word limit. It's about a page, I guess, maybe a little bit over a page on sort of Microsoft Word or something like that. And I'll talk about exactly what that personal statement needs to look like later. But I think the key points are that for both the Common App and Coalition App, there are several different prompts that might ask a student to reflect on a challenge that they faced, or something. There's lots of sort of guiding prompts, but there's also always a topic of your choice, which I typically recommend students choose, because I think a lot of times the prompts, they're great for brainstorming and sort of writing those initial drafts, but students can sometimes feel a bit boxed in by that. So the topic of your choice is always a good option, and that way you can use the same personal statement for any university on the Common App. You could use the same for the Coalition App as well if you happen to have universities on both. And then what I found as well is these universities that do have separate applications, you can often take the personal statement that you've written and either tweak it slightly to fit the writing requirements for those universities, or break it down into smaller chunks, which is what you might need to do for the University of California, for example, because they, rather than asking for one personal statement, they have 4 smaller essays that tend to touch on similar themes. So the point I guess I'm trying to make with all of this is that there is a lot of writing involved in the US application process, and the best way to sort of approach this writing so that a student is doing their best work and also not doing too much work is to really get ahead of planning and think about, what do I need? So if you're applying on Common App, that's one personal statement. Coalition App, you can use the same personal statement. But if you do have these other universities on the list, like MIT, the University of California, Georgetown, and there's others as well, know what the writing requirements are for those, and think about, is there a way that you can strategize so that you can use the same piece of writing in different ways, rather than having to write 5 different personal statements, essentially. So I think that's it for the basics for the US personal statement.
I'll step in here. So as Rachel sort of briefly outlined there, and I know she will explore in more depth, the US system does require a little bit more writing. There may well be multiple required pieces of writing, essays, and the content may well differ as well. So with the UK application, you apply through this central program, which is UCAS, and it's one application that goes to all 5 of your chosen universities. So whereas in the US, you may need to research the universities you're applying to and then get a good understanding of what you need to prepare for each of those. You may be able to use different bits multiple times, but you will need to be putting forward separate essays. On the whole, with the UK system, you just need to provide this one personal statement. It's 4,000 characters, including spaces. It may sound like a lot. It isn't. It doesn't give you a huge amount of space to really paint a picture of why you are the person that should be going to that university or one of the universities you're applying to. It, much like the US ones, 4,000 characters does turn out to be about a page on Word if you're using sort of a normal size font, 11 or 12 or something like that. And that same application will go to all 5, so you will not have an opportunity to say specifically why you might want to go to one university over another. The reason it's so important in your UCAS application is that it's really the only opportunity to give a unique insight into you and why you are the right person to go to that university. So your school will be providing a reference, which does give another opportunity for this, but obviously it's not provided by you as the applicant. So within your control, you have the opportunity to differentiate yourself with this personal statement. And if you're going for very competitive universities where the people that you're applying against are also going to have, you know, lovely GCSE results and wonderful predicted grades, on paper you're all going to look fairly similar. So where you get to really show yourself off is the personal statement. There are some universities where you might get to provide additional work. So Oxford and Cambridge, for example, might request sort of essays or additional tests in your application. But for the vast majority of UK universities, it's just this one application, one personal statement, no interview. So this is your only opportunity. And we'll talk a little bit more about content further down through this webinar. But to sort of summarize it very briefly, the priority within this personal statement is to show why you are academically suited for this chosen degree. So they don't want to know sort of you've been captain of the football team first off. They want to know what you've done at school that has made you want to choose this subject to study, and then what you've done above and beyond that to prove it, and then explain why, and then show that you've got the academic maturity to sort of explore that subject at the university level. That's a very short summary of the UCAS personal statement.
I think so one of the things that the US does actually have in common with the UK personal statement is that, as Harriet said, it is a student's chance to differentiate themselves from other applicants, and that's true in the US as well. If you think about the US application, it does have sort of similar components in the sense that you're also sending your grades or your scores and recommendation letters from the school. So they will see similar bits of information about each student. And the personal statement, and in the US there's other essays as well, which I can talk about a bit at the end, called supplemental essays. But those, as Harriet said, really are the main way that a student can say, this is who I am, this is why you should choose me. However, I think that's probably where the similarities lie. And as Harriet was saying, sort of the purpose of the UK personal statement is more about academic suitability. I would say, you know, that's not at all what the US is about. And so I'll sort of explain what it is about. So US personal statement, rather than talking about a student's academic suitability, is more about who the student is as an individual, who they are as a person. And so the way that this is done is a student might have a thesis essentially that they want to share. This is who I am, these are the qualities that I have, whatever that thesis might be. And the student typically chooses an event to describe or some sort of narrative, but it's really a more creative exercise rather than the UK personal statement. To me looks similar to what I would write for a cover letter for a job. Basically, this is, you know, the experiences that I've had, and this is why I think I'm suitable for this university or for this course, rather. But the US personal statement is something that even in in American school, I think a lot of students really aren't used to this style of writing, and it can be quite difficult for students to get used to the level of reflection that they're asked to do, especially as teenagers, because I know that even as I have gotten older, I am not entirely sure who I am as a person, and so I think it's really quite difficult to ask a teenager who's still growing in every possible way, who are you as a person? But that's what the U.S. personal statement is looking for. And in terms of, yeah, I'll show an example later and kind of go into a little bit more detail about the actual content. But I think, again, it's really important to have some sort of thesis. So the student should not be just rambling about their life in this essay. You don't want to just choose a story that sounds nice, but that doesn't necessarily have a point to it. The admissions officers that are reading this personal statement, they might only have a few minutes on it, and they want to be able to read it very quickly and immediately get a sense of who is the student, how can I envision them on my campus, what will they contribute besides sort of academic ability to our campus, because as I've mentioned in earlier webinars, the US has a really significant pastoral role to many universities. And so, yes, it's important to be academically able at a university, whatever that might mean for each university, but they also want to know, what will you be like in sort of co-curricular activities, or who will you be as a roommate, who will you be as a neighbor on campus, and that sort of thing. So we'll talk about the process of writing the personal statement, but I think let's just start with the fact that it's a very different personal statement to the UK. And if anyone is quite new to this and hasn't actually seen an American personal statement before, again, please just reach out after the webinar, and I'd be happy to send along some past examples that we've used, because I think that's probably the easiest way to see, well, what should it look like? Here's the finished product. And so, yeah, I think that's about it for the overall purpose.
Great. I'll do the same for the UK. I think I've already touched in on this a fair bit, and I do hate to sound repetitive, but sadly that is how this is going to work. Because in reality, although it's quite overwhelming when you're staring at a blank page and trying to figure out how to write your personal statement, ultimately it should be quite simple. Once you've got your head around how it's meant to look, and you can start this. We always recommend those who are coming to this process to not be overwhelmed if you can try to prevent it anyway, and to think about sort of writing down some bullet point notes about why it is that they've chosen the subject. They'll keep a diary maybe of things you've read or watched or listened to that are relevant to that, and by doing that you're sort of building a portfolio of things you can take and put into your personal statement, and then it can be refined as you reach the sort of deadline for sending off your application. So yeah, whilst it's easier said than done, I've already done my university degree. I appreciate I've been through it. The process should be fun and interesting, and should motivate you more to know that that's the degree route that you really, you've chosen the right degree route. So the way that we would recommend, definitely start with those bullet points, thinking about academic potential, why you've chosen this degree, and then demonstrating it. So we would, I also, don't want to simplify everything. Obviously everyone has their own writing style, but point, so you're making a point as to what it is that has really appealed to you. Evidence, so you're giving some form of evidence as to what you've done to explore that, and then explain. So what has that done that's made you, particularly motivated, and then maybe led you to further your understanding of that topic area. I appreciate that's simplifying things to a certain extent, and it will depend on your subject and your personal reasons for wanting to choose it, but that's a really good tool to use. There's a point, evidence, explain when you're thinking about how you're going to write your personal statement. A lot of people have been told through school, you know, do lots of extracurricular, it's going to be really beneficial to you in your university application. Definitely true. You know, we would never want to deter people from being part of a team, being in the orchestra, the choir, you know, getting involved. These are all things that will really develop your soft skills, make you a better, more rounded individual. But the reality is, in the personal statement, those extracurricular elements aren't the main focal point. So you do perhaps want to pluck a few of those from your extracurriculars, from your supercurriculars, and put them into your personal statement. But it isn't going to be the main focal area. That is all about your subject choice. So definitely don't stop doing things that are extracurricular and that are developing your sort of skills and interests outside of your academic studies. But sadly, with the amount of space you have on your personal statement, if you're looking at going to sort of very competitive, particularly very competitive UK universities, that is something that we would recommend is just a sort of small paragraph towards the end that gives some sense of your alternative interests. Go to the next slide, which I think is also on UCAS. So this is just, again, a very simplified sort of structural example. Like Rachel said, in terms of giving examples of how personal statements might look from a US perspective, we can certainly do the same from a UK perspective. There are lots of good personal statements that we can use as examples. Obviously, the name does indicate that it needs to be yours and from you, but sometimes if you're trying to work out how to get started, it could be really useful just to have a read through how other people who have been successful with their applications put theirs together. So we would definitely, as you can see from the way that these sort of 4 bullet points are split, you can see where the academic focus lies. So that's 80%, so 40% on the course choice, more general, 40% on the course choice, more academic. So that basically is saying, you know, what has led you to want to study that course in the first instance, and then what have you done above and beyond to sort of really explore that further. And then the wider experience can be things that you've explored independently, or things you've been involved in at school, but that are still relevant to your degree subject. You would also, within that, be thinking about some of your extracurriculars. So, you know, obviously, if you've been the captain of every team throughout your time at secondary school, that's seriously impressive. But if you are going to sort of write about each of those, it's going to use quite a large chunk of your personal statement. So as an example, you would think about how to sort of reduce that content while still displaying the fact that you've been involved with these sports to this level, what you've learned from your role within those teams, how that might be beneficial to you as you move from school to university level learning, that you're, you know, good with people, good team player, all of those sorts of things are, you know, beneficial, but it's just a question of making sure that they're not given too much weight above and beyond the academic. And then we would always recommend wrapping it all up with a good conclusive statement at the end. You know, you've got to think about yourself as the person who might be reading this personal statement. Their roles vary from university to university. It may be that they are part of an initial filtering stage. They're going to put you on a sort of a potential pile, which will then be read by a subject specialist or something. You know, there are going to be lots of very well-written personal statements. You've just got to think about how you're going to conclude it that will make them think, yeah, that really does sound like a really suitable candidate. Let's give them a go, put them to the next stage of our selection process. So that's the basic structure that we would recommend, and we do have templates that we can share if people want to So you sort of use that structure and see whether it works for them. The one sort of note here is that Oxbridge applications need even more focus on academic content. If you're applying to Oxford or Cambridge, you still obviously will have the 5 spaces available on your application. So you will have Oxford or Cambridge as one of those, and then 4 other degrees that you're applying for. So, you know, you've got to think about the balance quite carefully, because obviously you're not only applying to Oxbridge, but both of those universities are significantly more kind of focused on your academic potential, and they want to see that you have the maturity and the kind of academic interests to be suited to their style of education, which is obviously, you know, quite different to other universities, and the way you're taught and the way that your day-to-day university life, you know, the expectations, the higher number of essays that you'd have to put forward and discuss. So they just need some indication that you're very well suited to that. So the split needs to be a little bit more weighted towards the academic than with the other universities. I think there's one more slide from me, and I think you then go back to the US. Yeah. So what should be avoided? I think, you know, don't want to keep on banging the drum again and again, but too much extracurricular. Again, I would say if you have loads of extracurricular, still write it in your first draft, and then someone who's supporting you can help you kind of navigate around, sort of maybe keeping the content in, but using shorter words, maybe making it a little bit more sort of you know, less flowery language, so you've got a little bit, you know, more potential to discuss your extracurricular, but without having too much space given to it. So discussion of hobbies as well, you know, sometimes they're related to your chosen degree, so perhaps that makes it different. Again, don't worry too much at the beginning. Write everything down that you want to include, but then think about what the most effective areas to focus on will be, and then you will, you know, hopefully after a few drafts, lots of people write many drafts, so don't be sort of too taken aback by how to and fro the process can sometimes be, but you know, you don't want to be talking about your hobbies too much, particularly if they're not hobbies that you've been doing that much in your 6th form. A lot of people fall into a trap of trying to sound too clever, basically, you know, almost like they swallowed a thesaurus. You do not need to do that. Simple is better. We want to, you know, understand what it is that has made you want to study this subject. And, you know, I read a lot of personal statements. I'm not a sort of subject specialist in sciences, economics, these kind of areas. And I always say to people, I need to be able to understand it. So you've got to pitch it right, even though the person that will be reading it within a university admissions office may well be better versed on your chosen subject area. They may not still be the subject specialist, especially not at the first round. So think about it in terms of someone who is not well versed on your subject needs to understand you don't need to overcomplicate it. You don't want to waste too much time on lots and lots of descriptive words. It just needs to be quite straight to the point, but give some sort of colour as to why you've chosen this course. And then another trap that people fall into, this final bullet, is wanting to put everything they've done on. And it's always really impressive when people who are applying to university have done lots. You know, this is great. You've read lots of books that are relevant. You've watched TV, film, podcasts, TED Talks. Brilliant. But if your personal statement is just a list, it doesn't really give anything. It needs to be you selecting things that have been particularly interesting to you, and then explaining why. So going back to that point, evidence, explain idea, you definitely don't want to just list 3 or 4 books in a row that sound impressive and probably are impressive books that you've read, because that's essentially just using up characters without giving the reader any idea as to why it's interested you, and to give a sense of what that has led you to think and why then you want to read the subject at university. So just always think about the context and why you're putting it into your personal statement.
Great. I already have a bunch of questions for Harriet, so I hope other people are also jotting down their questions. And again, you can share them in the Q&A anytime, and we'll save time at the end. But I already so many questions. I'm excited to learn more about the UK personal statement. So just to switch gears now and talk about the US for a moment. I have some snippets from different personal statements here below. You'll see that they're very different topics. So these are not from one personal statement, but each one makes a point that is typically in every personal statement. I just wanted to show some variety in terms of the topics that students can write about. I think very similar to the UK writing process, you will have many drafts. You may change your direction multiple times as you're writing. You will certainly benefit from a proofreader, but I think most importantly, you should write in your own voice as well. So you want to be very, very careful with that balance in having someone proofread or edit your personal statement without doing so, without overly editing to the point that it doesn't sound like you anymore. And I think importantly also that it doesn't sound like a teenager anymore, because American admissions officers, they know sort of the range of writing for a secondary school student, and that's what they expect to see. So as Harriet said, if it sounds like you swallowed a thesaurus, that's not how you would normally write. That's not how you would speak, and admissions officers will not be impressed by that. They will be a little bit taken aback and wonder, what are you actually trying to say? Because even if they know all of those words separately, and they will be sort of I think that to write to sort of the average educated person who may or may not understand the topic that you're writing about. In the past, I've had really great essays about things like anime. I don't know anything about anime, but the student was able to write about it in a way that I was able to understand the message and appreciate the topic, even if I hadn't necessarily seen the anime that he was describing. So keep that in mind as well. In terms of the actual personal statement, I think I mentioned earlier that really any topic can be used. So there are prompts that you can follow, but at the end of the day, you can just write about anything. Maybe there are some sort of cliche topics that we would want to avoid. So things like the athlete who gets injured right before the big game, or I probably wouldn't encourage any student to write about the pandemic unless they had a very, very unique experience in the pandemic, because we all went through the pandemic and we all had sort of things happen to us. And you want to keep in mind that the admissions officer reading your essay may only have a few minutes on it, and so you want to grab their attention, you want to keep it, and you want to make some very good points very quickly. So we want to avoid sort of overused topics that a lot of students might write about, because admissions officers are maybe a bit overworked, and we don't want their eyes kind of glazing over as soon as they say like, oh, another essay about whatever. On the other hand, your topic does not have to be this incredibly unique experience that no one else has ever had. You don't have to talk about the time that you jumped out of a helicopter and landed in a volcano, right? You don't need that experience. A lot of students will come to me and be very worried that they haven't done anything worth writing about. And that's just not true, because regardless of who you are or what you've done, what is worth writing about is who you are as a person. And that's, again, the whole point of the personal statement from the US perspective. So you don't need to have this exceptionally sort of unique story or background to write a really good personal statement that reveals what your sort of background is, or how your mind works, or whatever it is you choose to write about. So some shared elements of great personal statements would be an engaging introduction. So again, the admissions officer is reading this really quickly. You want to grab their attention and kind of give them a hint as to what you're going to be writing about. So we've got an example here. I could hear her typing on the other side of the closed door. Tap, tap, tap. I patiently waited for her communication. A robotic voice said, "Bella, we will eat you now for breakfast." I laughed, knowing instantly what my Japanese host mom was trying to communicate. So we can already see that this student, has had some sort of experience where she has stayed in Japan with a host family. That's interesting. We can already see a little bit of her personality as she's sharing this, this funny mistranslation that she's experienced. And that is, I think that "we will eat you now for breakfast," it catches someone's eye and you think, what is this about? And that's exactly what we would want, is just the first couple of sentences to really grab someone's attention. And then the next little sample that I have here, we have the reflection element, which is super important in US personal statements. Again, if you look at the sample prompts on the Common App or the Coalition app, you'll see a lot of the prompts ask students to reflect on things: a lesson that they learned, a challenge that they overcame, a time they changed their mind about something. Whatever it is, it's asking students to not just talk about your experiences, but also to think about, what did this mean? Why was this significant? Why is this the experience that I'm choosing to share in my limited 650 words and my one personal statement that I'm going to send to all of these universities? Why did I choose this? So the example I have here: "It was a strange experience for me growing up in a fusion of Jewish and Thai culture. The conflicting cultures of Thai obedience to authority versus the always questioning nature of Judaism created a hybrid point of view that." So again, we have a very succinct sort of peek into this student's background. We know that the student, has a multicultural background, and it's two cultures that maybe we don't often see together. And so that's interesting. And we see that reflection of thinking about, what does it mean that I'm half Thai and half Jewish? How has this affected my worldview? How has this shaped who I am as a person? And so again, that's the purpose of the US personal statement, the point of this little writing exercise. And then finally, good personal statements also make connections. So it's not just this one story and this one sort of thought that a student has. It's, how has this story affected other parts of my life? How has this perspective been applied to other areas of my life as well? So again, we have this example. I want to give back to the country that has offered so much to me. Since the beginning of high school, I have been enrolled in my school's political science academy. In this academy, and the student would give examples of this co-curricular activity that relates to the overall theme and thesis of this personal statement. So in this case, it was about sort of giving back to the student's country. And so this can be done in pretty much any topic. Sometimes students write about things like, think of an example that I should have had off the top of my head here. They might write about their love of food and how that inspired their love of travel, and then start talking about the different places that they visit because they were hunting down that perfect chili in Marrakesh or whatever it might be. And like I said, it does not have to be this unique thing. It doesn't have to be an experience that no one else has ever had before. I've seen lots of really great essays about, even sort of mundane topics. One of my favorite from last year was a student writing about how she had a sort of minor corrective surgery on her eye, which is something that, most students have had these small things happen to them throughout their life. But she wrote about it in a really sort of charming way that revealed her personality, and talked about, the lesson that she learned from that experience. And that's the most important thing of all. So I think that's sort of the overview of the US personal statement. And like I said, I'm happy to send full examples to anyone who wants to read them. You can see it's very different to the UK. We're not at all talking about academic subjects that the student wants to study. We're not talking about their experience with any particular subject. It's really focused more on their sort of life experiences or the things that they think about. So there could be an academic element to the US personal statement, certainly, but that it's just not the main purpose. And it's not any sort of requirement. I think, as just a final example, what I wrote about for my personal statement many moons ago was I described a school trip that we had. We went canoeing on a river, and in the area it had rained recently, and so the river was higher than it normally was. And the river actually covered up the markings on the bridge where we were meant to stop. And because my canoe was in sort of the front of the pack, we just kept going and didn't realize that we were meant to stop. And the other canoes were a little bit slower than us, and the sort of guide of the tour had managed to get to the bridge in time to stop all of them, but we had sort of made it past him. And I just wrote about that experience and how we had to sort of haul our canoes up to this little holiday village where nobody was home and figure out how we were going to get back to our school without our cell phones and without any way of communicating. But it wasn't, a unique sort of experience. I'm sure lots of students sort of have mishaps on school trips. It was just a local river. We weren't in some, really interesting country or anything like that. And it was a day that, frankly, I probably would have forgotten about if I hadn't written my personal statement about it. There was nothing exceptional about it, but what made it stand out was just the way that I wrote about it. I revealed my sort of personality. I revealed my perspective. And, I just sort of turned it into a personal statement that revealed who I was at the time. And any student can do that with pretty much any set of experiences or any perspective. So, I think that's kind of the moral of my story here, is that even though I know it looks very overwhelming for students at first, and it is a lot of work that takes many months to sort of get to that final draft, it is manageable. But do reach out if you have questions, because like I said at the very, very beginning, I know this is the sort of writing that most students are not used to doing. I certainly wasn't. And I think it helps just to have lots of examples and a little bit of advice on how to actually get started with that. So I think we'll just talk about some different resources that we have, and please do ask questions specifically about personal statements if you have them. Like I said, have some questions for Harriet already, so I can get the ball rolling. But if anyone else has questions, please start typing those in the Q&A feature, and we'll get to those after we just sort of talk about the different resources that students can use for each of our personal statements.
Great, thanks. So just a sort of final word from me. Obviously, we have the questions coming, but whilst the personal statement for UK universities is just the one personal statement, I wouldn't advise people leave it too late to start getting it written, and the summer holiday does provide a really good opportunity. You're not at school, you don't have all the distractions of school, the extra school work, so it's a really good opportunity to focus and think about it. So our recommendation would definitely be, if you're moving into your upper sixth this September, and therefore looking to send an application off, the deadline for non-Oxbridge being January the 15th, we would encourage anyone who's in that position and has made that sort of decision on their course choice and things, so is ready to get started, to really have a very good sort of almost final draft of a personal statement ready for them when they return to their school in September. So it's just good practice to have a short list of universities that you've really thought through and chosen well. So thought about, the range of entry requirements and elements like that. So return to school with a short list and a good draft of a personal statement that isn't just your first and rushed attempt, but actually something that you've spent quite a lot of time working on. And the links here, which we will share this presentation with all of the viewers today, and they will also be popped onto our blog. ESM will share it too. These are all clickable links, and I'd probably start with the videos. Those are on the Keystone blog. They were written by Ed Richardson, Keystone's Director of Education. They are probably sort of 10-minute reads each, maybe not even that long, but they really do give a very, very strong starting point to this process. And then the website links on the left-hand side. Even if you're not applying to Oxford or Cambridge, it's well worth having a look at the links there for your subject, so what they recommend, because Oxford and Cambridge are both particularly good at providing recommendations for sort of pre-university reading towards a certain course. So it may be that you're not going for Oxford or Cambridge, but that it will still add masses of value to your personal statement to think about their recommendations. You can also do things like watch lectures that are put on by those universities. And again, you may not be applying to them, but other Russell Group universities are going to be impressed if you've watched Oxbridge lectures during your summer break. So definitely take a look at those links. Which and UCAS, both really good resources for searching courses in universities. The UCAS website is actually really very useful and has lots and lots of videos as well. So if you're just not that sure about the process and you find it quite hard to sort of take in lots of reading and information just written on a website, it's worth sort of having a look at their videos as well, which will be pretty short but full of information. The main piece of advice is to start early, and even earlier if you're looking at going to the US, down the US route as well. It could be particularly easy for those looking at US and UK application to put the UK one to one side. Perhaps they think, okay, UCAS is a much more straightforward system, I only need one personal statement. But it isn't like that. You still need to be well prepared. You cannot leave this to the last minute. It's too important. So just make sure that you set aside enough time to do both really well.
And I think I will echo the sort of sentiment that summer holiday is really good time to work on your US personal statement as well. I think a lot of students, especially in the UK, they wait way too long to start this, and then it's a really stressful process. And it shouldn't be. It should be, it's self-exploration. It should be interesting. It should be fun, albeit hard work. But if you wait too long, it will be stressful because, as I said, there's going to be many drafts. There's going to be changes in direction, and if you can spread that out over a longer period of time, it just makes the whole process a lot more relaxed. So in terms of links for the US side of things, I think the first place to look is actually at your university list. So see which universities are on the Common App, see which are on the Coalition app, and then see which are not on either app, and then think about what are the essay requirements for those universities. So again, I mentioned a few earlier, like MIT or University of California system, but it's really important to think about what is expected of you from a personal statement point of view. And this is not to get confused with the supplemental essays, which are a completely sort of separate idea. Each university may have anywhere from one to several, usually smaller essays where they ask things like, why are you applying to NYU? And that's separate to the personal statement. So not to get those confused, but for now, we're just focusing on the personal statement. So think about, do you just need the one personal statement? Do you have any universities that don't accept the personal statement because they're not on the Common App or Coalition app and they want something different from you? And just make sure you know what's coming. And then you can take a look at the essay prompts on the Common App or Coalition, and remember, for both of them, there is always the option to just write about anything. That tends to be the easiest option for students. And then we will send this out again. Excuse me. We will send this out later. So I've got a couple links here to an article on how to write a personal statement, sort of the actual process that students go through, as well as a video that we've produced as well. So we'll send that out afterwards. And I think let's take some time and answer some questions. So Harriet, if you don't mind, I've got one question that, as I was sort of, listening about the personal statement in the UK, I was wondering, what do students do if, I know that they're meant to write sort of a general personal statement that gets sent to each university. So I'm guessing that they would then apply to very similar courses at each of those universities. But how do they sort of talk about the course name, I guess it is, or the subject, if it's maybe similar but different at the universities they're applying to? So I guess if it's the difference between PPE and I don't know, something else that's not quite the same, international relations, how do they sort of approach that in their personal statement?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it is one that does pose a few problems, particularly there are some courses that are available, say Oxford and Cambridge, that aren't actually available at that many universities. So you get yourself into a position where you have to think about what the other courses are going to be on your shortlist and how you are going to make your personal statement remain relevant to all without sort of basically red flagging, I'm not applying to this course as my number one course. It's worth noting universities don't know where else you've applied, and there's no sort of ranking system. You don't need to specify what your favourite choice or anything like that is when you apply. So universities won't know that you've applied to multiple courses, but you do have to be a bit clever when you're putting your personal statement together. I suppose there are ways you can reference subjects without being so explicit with the subject, the degree headline subject title. What you would want to do is sort of integrate the various things. So you will always talk about multiple subjects. So you will cover your sort of A-level studies and what is added. So say you're applying to read history of art at university, but you did English A-level, you would be talking about what you learned in English and how maybe you can relate it to history of art and what literature you've read that maybe is in a similar time period to an era of history of art that you found particularly interesting. And you don't need to sort of, flag up every time it's a direct reference to your degree choice. You do just have to be a little bit sensitive to how it's reading so that it's not kind of directly obvious. Something like PPE, trying to read PPE and maybe economics at other universities. You're still going to be talking about topics that are relevant across all areas, but you wouldn't be saying, I am applying to read PPE because. You would say, my interest in economics stems from, and I'm also really interested in philosophy and how it relates, and go into that sort of route. Again, if people are looking at that sort of shortlist where there are different degrees, different degree titles, I would make sure you start even earlier, just so you're giving yourself the time to make sure that you're sort of streamlining it so it's not very much weighted towards one university, because you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're kind of blocking the other options off.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I remember when I worked at a UK school before I became sort of a counselor, I would read a lot of personal statements from just a proofreading side of things. And it was really interesting to sort of see how different students tried to apply to those slightly different subjects, and you do really have to get quite creative in the way that you phrase things, and it seems like a very delicate process. So I think it's something that it seems like it takes a lot of time and probably quite a bit of help to do.
Yeah, I would say if you're applying to degree courses that are sort of polar opposites or completely different, that would definitely be something I would just take a step back from and think about why you're doing that and whether that's the best strategy. Lots of applicants have multiple subject interests, and it's absolutely fair that you might be interested in applying to read English at one university and history at another, but it's ultimately going to mean that you're sort of watering down the quality of your application. So if you're looking to do that, just think through why, and make sure you've really kind of unpicked your reasons for that subject or multiple subject choice, and think about, actually, am I leaning one way? If so, maybe I should apply to read that subject across all 5 universities.
I don't know if we have any questions, actually. So if anyone does have any last minute questions, please feel free to send those now. Otherwise, both of our emails are here on the slides. You can send us individual emails if you have questions about US or UK, and we will send the slides with everything that we talked about today, as well as the links to the different resources that we recommend. And then as well, if anyone missed our earlier webinars and wants to see us talk about sort of creating the list of your short list of universities, or what was I can't remember what
just the application process.
The application itself, yeah. I was gonna say, we've done this for, I think, since February. We've been talking about the sort of differences in UK and US. So there's a lot of information that we've shared, and we're happy to reshare that, or just have individual chats if that's helpful with anyone, because we appreciate that it's a lot to sort of digest. But I think, as always, the key is just start early for both application processes, and be prepared, be organized, and everything should be okay.
Great.
I don't think we have any questions. Okay, great. Well, it was wonderful seeing you again, Harriet. Thank you so much for your expertise on the UK side of things. I always learn a lot, which I think is really nice. Even though I don't necessarily do anything with the UK side of things, it's nice to sort of understand what my students are going through. So that's really, really helpful. And I'm sure we'll see each other again at some point, although the webinar series is sadly finished for now. So
yeah, thank you for organizing it. It's been really great.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for joining. Do reach out if you have any other questions about anything related to US or UK applications. And yeah, everyone have a good rest of your day.